If we crossed that Rubicon, that nuclear taboo, you'd get escalation. It has the potential to be truly catastrophic.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States.
You have a big explosion. You have a broad spread of radiation.
Historic first for arms control, we will actually reduce U.S. and Soviet strategic nuclear arsenals.
You have electromagnetic pulses, which shuts down electronics and shuts down modern life. But then you get to the thing which give you the potential for billions of deaths. Nuclear winter.
The United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
I've been doing deals for a long time. I've been making lots of wonderful deals, great deals. That's what I do. Never, ever, ever in my life have I seen any transaction so incompetently negotiated as our deal with Iran.
Nuclear winter is you blot out the sun and you destroy the agricultural season. And so now there's no more food in huge areas of the world. And and as I understand the studies, it may not destroy the entire agricultural system, but it destroys enough of it that the growing season gets very truncated. And so you really have famine across the world.
What's going to happen with Iran? And there'll be some interesting days ahead. That's all I can tell you. We're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments.
And so, this is these are very real consequences, and we're close to them. This is existential. This is destroying human civilization and even, human life as we know it.
What specifically?
Well, they can't have a nuclear weapon.
Did you mean military action, though, if they don't agree?
Oh, if necessary? Absolutely.
In a surprise announcement during an Oval Office meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on April 7th, President Trump teased nuclear talks with one of the U.S.'s largest adversaries.
We're having direct talks with Iran, and they've started. It'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting, and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with.
In 2018, President Trump famously withdrew from the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which gave the Middle Eastern nation access to the international market in exchange for reducing its nuclear weapons program. But Trump didn't think the deal was strong enough, calling it a one-sided deal that should have never ever been made.
At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program. Today, we have definitive proof that this Iranian promise was a lie.
So where does the U.S. currently stand with Iran on nuclear weapons? Who has nukes, and who should we be worried about? Since August 1945, when the U.S. dropped Little Boy and Fat Man nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in an effort to end World War II, nuclear weapons have been front of mind for world leaders. Although many efforts have been undertaken in the last 50 years to decrease nuclear missile stockpiles with success, the Federation of American Scientists has warned that although the global nuclear inventory has been in decline, the pace of reductions is slowing. Charles Moxley, an adjunct professor of law at Fordham Law School, who has written extensively on nuclear weapons, international law, and non-proliferation, says that some of the nations are now even potentially increasing their stockpiles.
As to world nuclear arsenals now, the trends are all towards much bigger numbers. The U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War had very large inventories, and we very substantially. The George H.W. Bush administration, shortly after the end of the Cold War, was very effective in the trend towards bringing down the numbers on an agreed basis between the U.S. and Russia. But we are into a huge new arms race. I mean, I have a number from a credible source that I did in a recent article. $1.5 trillion is the number that is on that is projected that we've committed to our nuclear weapons modernization.
And new reports have surfaced that U.S. scientists are working to jumpstart the development of a new 360 kiloton nuclear gravity bomb, as tensions with not only Iran, but also China escalate. Once produced, the bomb, known as B-6113, would be around 24 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and 14 times more powerful than the ones dropped on Nagasaki. In January, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist decided that we are closer to nuclear annihilation than ever, ticking their Doomsday Clock, which measures how close the world is to complete catastrophe, to 89 seconds to midnight. In 1947, the Doomsday Clock was set at 7 minutes to midnight.
In setting the clock closer to midnight, we send a stark signal. Because the world is already perilously close to the precipice, any move towards midnight should be taken as an indication of extreme danger and an unmistakable warning.
But how worried should we be about a global nuclear disaster? In 2025, 9 countries possess an estimated 12,331 warheads, with Russia and the United States leading the pack, owning about 88% of the world's total inventory of nuclear weapons. At the moment, Russia has the largest nuclear stockpile with an estimated 4,299 warheads, comparing to the US's 3,700. Estimates show China has approximately 600 warheads in its arsenal, France 290, the United Kingdom 225, Israel 90, Pakistan 170, India 180, and North Korea 50. Although other nations have nuclear weapons, some don't have them deployed and ready to launch. Russia, the US, France, China, and the United Kingdom are the only nations thought to have the capability to launch at a moment's notice.
We don't have to have our weapons on high trigger alert, but we do and Russia does. We have them ready to go off at a very short notice. How much time would an American president have to make a decision whether to use our nuclear weapons upon being advised that there's an incoming strike coming in that, as far as we know, is accurate? You know? And it's crazy. But the answer is a matter of minutes.
In 1968, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom became depository states to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT. The NPT is a landmark international treaty which set agreements for the non-proliferation and disarmament of nuclear weapons, as well as the use of nuclear energy. Since its signing, 190 countries have become parties to the treaty, except for India, Israel, Pakistan, and South Sudan. North Korea withdrew from the treaty in 2003. Although some countries like Russia, China, the United Kingdom, North Korea, India, and Pakistan are increasing their nuclear arsenals, global inventories have plummeted significantly since 1984, when the estimated global nuclear stockpile peaked at an estimated 70,374 nuclear warheads. Much of that decrease was due to several treaties to stop nuclear weapon proliferation, especially between the world's largest hoarders of nuclear weapons, Russia and the United States.
After the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think there was a sigh of relief. And I think the U.S. and Russia, the Soviet Union then, it led to a new era of arms control. And we could pull that up and list them. There was arms control after arms control. There were limits on testing under the sea and in outer space. There were arms control, taking the numbers of the weapons down.
5 months before the fall of the Soviet Union in December 1991, the US and the Soviet Union signed START I, or the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which, according to the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation, was the first significant reduction in the number of strategic nuclear weapons in both the US and the Soviet stockpiles. By the time the treaty was fully implemented in 2001, 80% of global nuclear weapons were dismantled. Although President George H.W. Bush and Russian President Boris Yeltsin signed START II in January 1993, which sought to ban the use of specific missiles, the agreement never took effect. START III negotiations between President Bill Clinton and Boris Yeltsin also never materialized. But after START II fell to the wayside, SORT, or the Strategic Offensive Reductions Treaty, took effect after being signed by President George W. Bush and Russian President Vladimir Putin in May 2002.
President Putin and I today ended a long chapter of confrontation and opened up an entirely new relationship between our countries.
SORT committed the US and Russia to reduce their deployed warheads to 1,700 to 2,200 each, and to continue the 1991 START I agreement until its expiration in 2009. Dr. Jonathan Flint, who teaches international law and military ethics at Case Western Reserve University, says there were several reasons why the world's superpowers decided to reduce their nuclear weapons capacity.
The point of the START treaties were to reduce the number of available weapons. And that was in part, there were multiple reasons for doing that. Some of them were certainly economic. Maintaining large nuclear weapons fleets is very expensive, but also to act as a form of trust building between the two sides. We'll cut ours if you cut yours, and we can verify together.
The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, eventually replaced SORT and START I after it was signed by President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev in April 2010. New START was the first verifiable nuclear arms control treaty between Russia and the United States to take effect since START I, according to the Arms Control Association.
New treaties basically emerge from a need. There is a pressing political need or a relational need to take some of the heat out of certain relationships. And so a treaty will exist because each side will have a need. Now, it may not be the same need. It may be that one side wants to take the heat out of the relationship. The other side wants to take some of the cost out of the cost of its nuclear weapons program. Certainly some of the literature and some of my colleagues in the field will say that nuclear weapons treaties are a bit like racing regulations. In car racing. So if you go car racing, you will see there's a great big thick manual of technical regulations that say what you can't do. And then you get some, clever engineer who looks at those regulations and says, but it doesn't say we can't do this, or this particular area is something that we can exploit, or that area is something that we can exploit. And then sort of what it does is it encourages development in different areas and different directions.
New START placed limits on each country's number of nuclear warheads to 1,550, down approximately 30% from what was limited by SORT. Russia and the United States announced that they met New START limitations by February 2018. The US and Russia even agreed to extend New START by 5 years in 2021.
Today, the United States and the Russian Federation completed the necessary legal procedures to extend the New START Treaty for 5 years. Extending the New START Treaty for 5 years ensures we have verifiable limits on Russian ICBMs, SLBMs, and heavy bombers through February 4th of 2026, avoiding a potentially unconstrained nuclear arms race.
But only a few years later, Russia's invasion of Ukraine put the nuclear treaty between the world's two largest stockpilers of nuclear weapons on ice.
We are reporting tonight from a country fighting for its survival.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin is calling this a, quote, special military operation to protect Donbass. It is clearly bigger than that.
Keep in mind, 24 hours ago, we were talking about ordnance hitting this nuclear plant.
Yesterday, Vladimir Putin recognized two regions of Ukraine as independent states. And he bizarrely asserted that these regions are no longer part of Ukraine and they're sovereign territory. To put it simply, Russia just announced that it is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine. So I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014.
Нам стратегическое поражение хотят нанести и лезут на наши ядерные объекты. В этой связи вынужден заявить сегодня о том, что Россия приостанавливает свое участие в договоре о стратегических наступательных вооружениях.
Flint says that depending on how the US and Russia's relationship transpires regarding nuclear weapons could cause a very interesting inflection point for non-proliferation.
If non-countries without nuclear weapons feel that, but have historically been contained under the protection of another nuclear weapons state, so let's, for example, say Japan, South Korea, NATO states, including France and the United Kingdom, but they're no longer under the protection of a NATO umbrella. And, for example, even other states who feel regionally embattled, so we could say Iran, then it would be rational under sort of this particular conception of the international system for them to pursue nuclear weapons.
In the past few years, certain leaders have started to raise the stakes by blatantly threatening the use of nuclear weapons, like North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin, who in 2022 threatened the West with nuclear retaliation if the territorial integrity of Russia was threatened.
Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
Vladimir Putin is becoming embarrassed and pushed into a corner. And I wonder, Mr. President, what you would say to him if he is considering using chemical or tactical nuclear weapons.
Don't. It will change the face of war, unlike anything since World War II.
So when Putin said, look, I may use nuclear weapons in Ukraine if I'm doing poorly, and our leadership, and this was during Biden, said, oh, this is horrible, and how can you say that? I'm the guy who had studied our literature and know that our military manuals say the same thing. If you or I are military, leadership at like a middle level officer level, and we're in a conventional warfare that we have responsibility for our troops on, and we're losing, the military training that our manuals will have given us is consider nuclear and go up the chain and recommend it if you think you need it. So we need to change that.
Russia is showing signs of recalcitrance. Generally speaking, when one side reduces cooperation with a treaty, so does another side. There's this idea in sort of relationships between countries of reciprocity. So if you do one thing, we'll do same. Now, what we find ourselves in the moment in the literature and said elsewhere is something of a realist moment. And realism is nothing to do with art or anything else like that. It's an idea of how countries work between countries, how the international system works. And that realism is about there's only a finite amount of power in the world, and you have to act to acquire as much of it as you can to protect yourself. I would ordinarily expect it back to sort of business as we experienced it in the 60s of, weapons build up, and sort of communication, but not as formalized as it is under the treaty stipulations. There may be an urge, for example, for Russia to increase its stocks of strategic and other nuclear devices, and it may be that the United States will seek to respond in kind. It depends on the relationship between Russia and the United States going forwards.
Although Putin and Russia's war in Ukraine remain an open question, many in the West are more concerned over adversaries like Iran gaining access to nuclear weapons, which President Obama tried to address by signing the controversial Iran nuclear deal in 2015. Though some have criticized the deal for its temporary restrictions and continuing to allow Tehran to use nuclear power, it's believed that the country still doesn't possess a nuclear weapon.
Iran wanted access, which had been fairly well closed off by the US and the international community. It wanted access to sort of the international market and to be able to do things and stuff that countries do in return for reducing its and stopping its nuclear weapons program. And it was successful. Under international monitoring, and everything else. Yes, was there some cheating? Absolutely there was. But does Iran currently possess a nuclear weapon? No. Do they have the capacity to build one? Quite probably. But they don't, seemingly, to the best of my information, and I don't have perfect information, they don't currently have a fieldable nuclear weapon.
And Trump has said that he's hoping to have a stronger deal than what Obama had.
If you're going to negotiate a new deal with Iran, can you elaborate how it's going to be more effective than JCPOA?
Well, I can't really say that, but I think it'll be different and maybe a lot stronger.
I don't know what the Trump administration even thinks a new, stronger nuclear deal looks like, and what it would be willing to return, to give in return for a stronger commitment, a stronger concrete removal, for example, of Iranian productive capability, smashing up its centrifuges and stuff like that, closing down its enrichment plant and stuff. I don't know what the US would be willing to give to achieve that end.
But now, the Trump administration will have to deal with an entirely new world than when the US and Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Iran's nuclear program has advanced since Trump ended the deal, according to the New York Times. In an April 2025 report, the Institute for Science and International Security raised its total score on Iran's nuclear program threats to 157 out of 180, signifying extreme danger, writing, "The possibility of Iran deciding to build nuclear weapons has been increased by the ongoing military conflicts in the Middle East, pitting Iran and its proxy forces against Israel and its allies, a conflict Iran is losing. The volatile security situation is now combined with the perception, if not the reality, that Iran is preparing to build nuclear weapons."
There are other questions that the United States has to think about when thinking about what it's willing to give away. How is any US accommodation of Iran's demands going to affect its relationship with Israel? How much of giving away to Iran's demands are going to affect its relationship with Iran's closest regional competitor, Saudi Arabia? What is it going to do to the US relationship with Iraq? What is it going to do to, for example, US deployments in the Middle East? How is it going to affect, for example, the US operations against the Houthis, who are Iranian-backed, in Yemen? So it means that there is an awful lot of requests that the Iranians could make, which would be unpalatable to the United States.
But with nuclear weapon stockpiles seemingly on the rise and tensions near boiling points, what's the level of danger? And is there a chance having more nukes actually makes us safer?
It is a great question whether more nukes make us safer, and the answer is no, N-O. You can interview anybody at the highest levels, certainly within the US over the years. It is recognized that these weapons could never rationally be used. And there's some argument about low yield nuclear weapons, which we can talk about. But people pivot to deterrence. And deterrence means, we have them and we threaten, don't do something that would really be detrimental to our interests as a country, or we may come back with nuclear. So that's the policy of deterrence. The essence of deterrence is second strike. You don't have a first strike against me, against my country. You can attack me. So you hit me with nuclear weapons, right? But we have a second strike. It may be in submarines that are at sea that are undetectable. It may be in missiles that are on airplanes that can't be reached. But as long as you have a second strike, you can deter the other guys attacking you. You don't need a lot of weapons to have a second strike.
I think it really does depend who owns them. Let's take, for example, North Korea. North Korea isn't really the most stable actor on the international stage, and their ownership of nuclear weapons causes concerns. And we don't know, for example, what the rules they have are for using them first. Now, if we enter into an era of proliferation, more nuclear weapons in the hands of more people, some of whom may not have the political culture or the constitutional constraints about using them or are in what they regard as life and death regional crises or life and death regional conflicts, then I would suggest that more nukes is bad. Looking at the current nuclear weapon states, not to put too fine a point on it, certainly the two major protagonists, the United States and the Soviet Union, have more than enough nuclear weapons to end life on this planet at least twice. I'm not quite sure how you need more nuclear weapons to assure safety when you already have more than enough to do the job.